The Arctic wind howled as jagged ice cracked beneath enormous paws. "I know you endangered you today." Nanook, a 9-year-old male polar bear, staggered forward, panting, his fur matted with sleet and crimson streaks. The ice floe that once cradled his home was now a crumbling death trap. In the distance, a haunting wail echoed, not wind, but the cry of his cub trapped on a drifting fragment of ice. Nanook let out a guttural roar, a primal sound soaked in panic and rage. The water surged beneath him, churning with fragments of ice, rising like a monstrous tide. He lunged, slipping, claws scraping against melting permafrost. The sea swallowed the ground behind him. Time fractured. Each breath was a countdown. He knew this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight against a world melting faster than he could run. A seagull screeched overhead. Ice shattered. A moment ago, there was land. Now, only water. And in the distance, his cub, silent. Nanook didn't remember the last time the ice had been solid. The Arctic had become a shifting puzzle of betrayal. He moved carefully now, paws bleeding from sharp ridges, hunger clawing at his belly. Behind him, the ghost of a den once warm with cubs and fur, now rested beneath the sea. He sniffed the air. Salt, rot, and something else. Machines. He had grown to fear that scent. He scanned the horizon. Nothing but ghostly white and silent gray. But somewhere in that silence he hoped that his cub, still adrift, still alive, might be waiting. But hope was thin as the ice beneath his claws. The ice creaked beneath Nanook's weight like an old door, warning him of every misstep. He stopped near a frozen ridge and lifted his head, scanning. Movement flickered. A shape? A boat? His muscles tensed. Men with guns had once taken his mate, their roars louder than any storm. He growled low, a reminder to himself that survival came first. But this shape vanished. Nothing but a mirage of desperation. He trudged on, exhausted. His breath came out in shuddering gasps. The land he once ruled was now a maze of death, and he was its last explorer. Snow began to fall. Gentle at first, then sharp, like shards of glass. Each flake melted on Nanook's back, adding weight to fur already soaked. He paused. In the silence he remembered warmth. The cub curling into his belly, the sound of breathing shared. A pang struck deeper than hunger. This wasn't just survival. It was a promise. He raised his head to the wind, scenting again. Nothing. But silence had never been empty. Somewhere his cub still breathed. And for that, he would not stop. A distant rumble trembled through the ice, like thunder beneath his feet. Nanook tensed. He knew this sound. The great melt was coming. Cracks spidered across the surface. He turned and ran. No plan, only instinct. The sea lunged up, hungry and cold. He vaulted across a widening gap, just as the ridge behind him collapsed. The Arctic was not quiet. It screamed. And in that scream, Nanook's vow echoed. He would find his cub, or die chasing the last piece of solid earth. Days before the ice shattered, Nanook had been a guardian, a father, and a sentinel of the north. The den had been nestled into a slope of wind-worn snow, a quiet sanctuary against the cruel winds. Inside, his cub had burrowed into his warmth, eyes still unopened, breath light and rhythmic. His mate, Sura, curled close, her gaze full of quiet strength. Nanook had stood watch then, proud, unbroken. The world had seemed eternal, as if no storm could touch them. But eternity cracked when the first meltwater reached their den. The walls sagged. The ground trembled. Sura had howled as the sea swallowed her. Nanook had tried, claws tearing, heart breaking. He had saved the cub. But at what cost? That night returned to him now, sharp as the ice beneath his feet. The ocean had always sung to them, a low, ancient lullaby of survival. But that day, it had screamed. Meltwater surged through cracks in the ice, flooding the den's lower walls. Sura had bolted toward the entrance, cub in her jaws, but a wave struck like a hammer, sweeping her into the dark. Nanook had lunged, snatching the cub just in time. The sea had swallowed the rest. He had stood there roaring into the storm, unable to hear his own voice over the crash. That was the moment Nanook changed. Not just a father, now, a survivor of loss. And with his cub now lost again, those memories boiled behind his eyes like fire trapped in ice. After the flood, Nanook had wandered for days with the cub cradled gently in his jaw. The ice was soft beneath him, each step leaving behind pools where once were prints. He had searched for shelter, warmth, anything that still remembered what it meant to be solid. At night, they huddled beneath fragile shelves of ice, and he would curl his body around the cub to block out the wind. He remembered the way the cub twitched in sleep, how its tiny nose pressed against his neck. Those nights were quiet, almost sacred. The world above was ending, but below his ribs, a heart still beat for something more than survival. It beat for that little soul he had saved. The cub had been curious. It would wander only a few steps, batting at icicles, chasing the flicker of a light reflecting off the sea. Nanook would watch with a mix of fear and love, knowing too well how the world punished innocence. Once, he saw the cub try to climb a sharp ridge and fall. Not far, but far enough for him to leap in panic. The cub had looked up, dazed, then licked his muzzle. Nanook had nuzzled him gently, his massive paw holding the cub close. That was the last moment they had touched. The final flicker of peace. The next morning, the ice had cracked beneath the cub as it followed a seagull too close to the edge. Nanook had awoken to silence. The cub was gone. Panic had sliced through him like wind through fur. He'd sniffed the air, caught the salt, and then the scream. Far across the water, the cub's ice drift had already split. Nanook had run, leapt, roared. But the gap widened. The sea took its prize. His voice cracked the sky, but the cub only drifted further, eyes wide, mouth open in silent confusion. He had tried to swim, but the current dragged him back. Now, hours later, he stood again in that same pose, the shoreline gone, only fading paw prints behind him. His breath was ragged, his heart a hammer. But his eyes, they burned with one thing, resolve. The wind was cruel now, sharp as knives, slicing through the stillness like a warning. Nanook climbed a ridge of brittle ice, each step a test of his balance and strength. Below, the ocean roared as if mocking his persistence. The flows ahead were jagged, erratic, scattered like a broken puzzle. Nanook paused. The horizon shimmered, blurred by heat rising off open water, a rare, unnatural warmth. That shimmer wasn't hope. It was danger. He needed to cross this stretch, but the ice wasn't a bridge anymore. It was a gamble. A misstep here would send him into the dark, freezing waters that had already stolen so much. But he pressed on, teeth clenched, claws biting into the slippery crust. He moved not with courage but with memory, every step fueled by the fading image of his cub's wide eyes and open mouth drifting away. A seal surfaced nearby, its eyes wide and unblinking, not prey but witness. Nanook stopped, both creatures locked in a silent moment of ancient understanding. Hunger clawed at him, but he didn't pounce. The seal slipped away with barely a ripple. Nanook watched it vanish, the choice to spare it etched in his bones. He wasn't hunting today. He was searching. Somewhere beyond these broken fields of ice floated his cub, and instinct, stronger than hunger, deeper than fear, told him to move faster. His body ached. His paws burned. But there was no room for rest. The seal's gaze lingered in his mind, a reminder that even predators must sometimes look inward and remember what they protect. The sky darkened without warning, clouds rolling in thick and fast like bruises across the heavens. A storm was coming. Nanook growled low, a sound swallowed quickly by the wind. The ice groaned beneath him, a sound he no longer feared, only measured. He had minutes, maybe less, before the weather would blind him. He quickened his pace, weaving through towering pillars of refrozen meltwater. The first snow hit like sand, stinging his eyes, then thickened to a blizzard. Shapes vanished. Footsteps disappeared behind him. Still, he moved forward, guided only by memory and instinct. In this white blindness, the difference between progress and death was measured in heartbeats. And his heart? It pounded with purpose. In the eye of the storm, Nanook collapsed. His massive body slumped beside a jagged ridge, chest heaving, eyes nearly shut. The cold pressed against him, cruel and intimate. But rest was not peace. It was memory. He saw his mate again, her breath on his neck, the cub nestled between them. They were together for one quiet second. Then it shattered. He gasped awake, heart racing, the storm still raging. It was a cruel mercy, the way dreams gave warmth just to steal it. But that dream lit a fire beneath his ribs. He stood slowly, ice clinging to his belly fur, and looked into the storm. Not with despair, but with defiance. He would not be buried by this. Not yet. The blizzard broke like glass, sudden, sharp, and gone. Sunlight spilled through cracks in the clouds, illuminating a new path of ice stretched toward the east. Nanook blinked against the brightness, steam rising off his fur. The silence that followed was heavy, sacred. He stood, taller now, gaze fixed forward. This was no miracle. It was a test. The storm had passed, but the journey sharpened. He would follow that trail. He would crawl if he had to. Somewhere beyond those glittering ridges, his cub waited, or at least the truth did. And that was enough. With a slow breath, Nanook took the first step onto the new ice. The wind calmed. The sun held its breath. The chase began again. Nanook followed the path eastward, his steps rhythmic, almost mechanical. The ice here was strangely smooth, unnaturally clean, a frozen mirror. Something about it felt wrong. The scent in the air had changed. It was no longer the wild blend of salt and snow, but the sterile, bitter tinge of oil and exhaust. He crouched low, nose twitching. In the distance, metallic shapes emerged through the frost haze, not mountains but machines. Massive structures hummed on the horizon. Drilling rigs. Human outposts. Civilization, invasive and cold. He had wandered into their zone. For years, they had been shadows. Now, they stood like steel giants. Nanook's fur bristled. Somewhere among that sprawl of smoke and iron, could his cub have been drawn to the light? Or worse, captured? The idea pierced deeper than any ice ever had. Smoke curled into the sky from steel chimneys, staining the clouds. Nanook crept closer, each step silent, his body low against the earth. The sound of motors echoed faintly, foreign, jarring. Between the rigs he spotted something that made his breath hitch. A white form, small moving. A cub. He inched forward, heart thundering. But as he approached, reality shattered hope. It wasn't his cub. It was a stray Arctic fox, tail thin, eyes hollow, scavenging near a discarded barrel. The fox turned and bolted, but the moment lingered. Even the wild things were drawn to this mechanical rot. The machines had become predators too, ones that didn't chase but swallowed. Nanook turned back to the ice, his instincts tangled in doubt. As dusk fell, artificial lights flickered on across the rig's site, casting a surreal orange glow onto the ice. Nanook crouched behind a broken snowbank, studying the outpost. He saw cages. Steel mesh pens. And inside one, something white and still. His muscles locked. The shape was too large for a fox, too small for an adult. It wasn't moving. Was it? He surged forward before instinct snapped him back. A generator rumbled nearby, and a pair of human figures crossed the snow, dragging gear. Nanook's breathing slowed. He watched the cage. The shape inside didn't stir. Minutes passed. Then, a twitch. A paw.wall. Alive.y. His heart thundered. His cub was here. Not lost. Not gone. But trapped. Nanook did not move for hours. He watched the cage like a ghost. When the workers finally retreated, leaving the site in humming silence, he stepped into the open. The cold returned with the absence of machines. Under the moonlight, the world felt real again. He approached the cage, muscles coiled, claws ready. Cub stirred. Their eyes met, and in that gaze, the world fell away. Recognition burned through frost. Nanook growled softly, pressing his nose to the bars. The cub whimpered, lifting its head weakly. But the steel held firm. He nudged the latch with his paw. Locked. Ducked. Rage welled up, primal and unstoppable. He didn't roar. He didn't charge. He simply began to dig, silently, at the ice beneath the cage. The steel resisted him, but the earth didn't. Nanook scraped and clawed beneath the bars, loosening the frozen base of the cage. Ice gave way slowly, in sharp, splintering chunks. The cub whimpered again, louder this time, as if hope had been reborn in its tiny chest. Minutes became an hour. Blood stained the snow from Nanook's cracked paws. Still he dug. Then, a snap. The ice foundation buckled. The cage shifted. He braced his body and shoved. It toppled, crashing onto its side. The door bent. Not enough. With a final heave, Nanook reared back and slammed his weight onto the latch. Metal screamed, then broke. The cub scrambled out, collapsing into his fur. They were free. Not safe, not yet, but free. The cub clung to Nanook's chest, its legs weak, trembling from confinement. Nanook licked its forehead, heart pounding with every breath. The sound of boots returned, faint at first, then growing louder. He tensed. Flashlights flickered across the snow. The humans were coming. Nanook scanned the terrain. No clear path, no shelter, only raw, open ice. He had no time to run, no time to plan. Just enough time to act. He nudged the cub onto his back, urging it to cling tight. A flare ignited nearby, red light slicing through the dark. Shouts rang out. Nanook roared, loud and furious, and bolted into the open. He would not lose the cub again. If he was to fall, it would be with his child wrapped in his fury, not behind a cage. Gunshots cracked behind them, sharp and terrible, but Nanook didn't flinch. His paws tore into the snow, muscles straining as the cub held on with small, desperate claws. The humans didn't chase on foot. They brought machines. A snow vehicle revved, its lights sweeping the ice like predators' eyes. Nanook veered, leaping across a jagged split in the earth. The machine followed, grinding the ice into powder. It was faster. But Nanook had the terrain. He knew its breath, its rhythms. With a burst of energy, he ducked beneath a ledge of glacial ice. The engine screeched as it tried to turn. The humans shouted. Then, silence. Nanook waited, hidden in the shadows. His breath heaved. The cub whimpered quietly. For now they were unseen. They didn't stop. They couldn't. The cub was breathing shallow now, exhausted. Nanook knew they needed more than hiding. They needed distance. He headed toward the black ridge, a cliff that dropped into frozen waters, but beyond it, he remembered a narrow stretch of land, a path rarely crossed by man. If they reached it, they might find real freedom. But the route meant climbing. Ice walls. Crevasses. Nanook placed the cub gently into a sling of fur between his shoulders and began the ascent. Every step cut his paws. Ice shattered under his weight. Wind screamed against him. But he climbed. Slowly. Brutally. His eyes never left the ridgeline. One goal. One heartbeat. One child. One climb. Halfway up, the wind shifted. Below them the sound of the engine returned, louder, angrier. They had been found. Light swept the lower ice fields. A spotlight skimmed across the cliffside, missing Nanook by inches. He pressed flat against the rock-hard frost, heartbeat hammering in his throat. The cub whimpered softly, burying its face in his neck. The ledge was too narrow, too exposed. But if they climbed back down, it would be the end. So Nanook moved again, higher, faster. Rocks crumbled beneath his claws. A loose slab gave way, crashing into the valley below with a thunderous echo. The humans looked up. Their lights shifted. Time fractured. With a roar, Nanook reached for the final ledge. With one last surge of raw strength, Nanook hoisted himself over the ridge. He collapsed, chest heaving, blood staining the ice beneath him. The cub rolled gently beside him, weak but alive. Behind them, the machines screeched to a halt at the cliff's edge. They couldn't follow. The ridge was too steep, too fractured. The humans stood in silence, staring. Nanook rose slowly, never looking back. The cub wobbled to his side, nuzzling his leg. Together, they limped toward the moonlight. The sea stretched ahead, silent, vast, unknown. But it was theirs now. The chase was over. The cost had been blood and pain, but the prize was freedom. The ridge behind them faded into mist as Nanook and his cub descended into a wide expanse of untouched snow. No machines, no tracks, just silence, sacred and vast. The cub limped beside him, its head low, but its steps were steadier now. Nanook nudged it gently, encouraging. The sun peeked from behind the clouds, low and soft. For the first time in days there was no immediate danger. But Nanook's body ached deeply, every wound reminding him how close they'd come to ending. He looked at his cub, smaller now, thinner but alive. And in that fragile life, there was a purpose. He hadn't saved the ice. He hadn't stopped the melt. But he had saved something that mattered more, his bloodline, his bond. The wild was wounded, but not lost. They found shelter beneath a crag of ancient ice, where the wind was muffled, and the snow felt soft. Nanook curled his body around the cub, who settled instantly into his warmth. Here, there were no cages, no engines, no eyes. Only the slow pulse of the earth beneath them. Nanook listened to his cub's breathing, deep and steady for the first time since the escape. He closed his eyes, but he didn't sleep. He simply existed, letting the silence hold him, letting the memories of pain dissolve into something quieter. The storm had passed, but a new world awaited. A harder one. He knew they would need to move again. But not now. Now, they had rest. And rest was enough. Morning broke gently, its light diffused by ice crystals floating in the air. The cub stirred first, blinking slowly, then rose and stretched, stumbling a bit. Nanook watched, a flicker of pride stirring in his chest. The little one sniffed at the wind, then looked up, expectant. Nanook stood too, bones cracking under strain, and shook the snow from his fur. The horizon stretched wide and pale before them. Somewhere out there, food, water, that wind, a place to begin again. Nanook lowered his head and let the cub climb onto his back. It held on more tightly than before. With a final look at their icy shelter, they turned east, toward the unknown, toward something resembling tomorrow. The ice had changed. Where once there had been vast solid plates, now there were broken mosaics, delicate, shifting paths. Nanook picked his route with care, the cub alert on his shoulders. The path was narrow but possible. Seals had returned to distant banks, gulls circled overhead. Nature had not surrendered completely. Not yet. For every fracture in the landscape, there was a new rhythm forming. The world was reshaping itself, and they were not outsiders. They were survivors, participants in its reformation. The cub made a soft noise, not fear, not pain, but curiosity. Nanook turned slightly, giving a low, encouraging growl. The path forward was unclear, but it was theirs to walk. And walk they would. By dusk, they reached a ridge overlooking a quiet inlet, water dark and still, reflecting the sky like glass. Nanook lay down slowly, his legs finally giving in. The cub climbed down and curled against him, nose tucked under his chin. Together, they watched the light fade. No words. No roar. Just the sound of snow falling gently on water. Nanook breathed in, deep and clean. The world hadn't healed, not yet. The scars were everywhere, in the land, in his bones. But in this small silent moment he saw not loss, but legacy. Not defeat, but defiance. The cub yawned. Nanook lowered his head. The night wrapped around them. And for the first time in a long time, the dark did not bring fear. The stars emerged one by one, dim through the veil of frost in the air. Nanook lifted his head toward them, blinking slowly. The cub lay at his side, asleep, its chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Around them, the Arctic stretched wide and silent. But it was not the same world he had once ruled. What had once been endless white was now dotted with dark pools and fractured lines. The ice had changed, but it still stood. Much like him, he had lost a mate, nearly lost a child, bled into the earth. Yet here he was, a monument not to dominance but to endurance, to staying when everything pushed him to flee. The stars shimmered above, and Nanook closed his eyes, not in sleep but in acknowledgement. The night no longer felt empty. It felt earned. In the dark, the cub stirred. Its eyes opened slowly, catching the faint glimmer of starlight above. It looked to Nanook, then to the sky, then rose, wobbling, uncertain, but upright. It stepped forward, small paws pressing into untouched snow. Nanook watched, breath quiet. This was no longer the helpless creature clinging to his back. This was something new. Something beginning. The cub turned, gave a soft, curious grunt, and waited. Nanook rose beside it, towering but silent. He didn't need to lead now. He simply needed to follow. And so they moved, side by side, two shapes fading into the night, leaving behind more than footprints. Leaving behind proof that survival can be beautiful. Far in the distance, an iceberg groaned as it fractured. A sound that once signaled collapse, now sounded like birth. Nanook paused at the edge of a cliff overlooking the open sea, the cub at his side. Water lapped at the ice with slow, hypnotic rhythm. The sea hadn't changed its hunger, but Nanook had changed his fear. He nudged the cub forward. The wind picked up, carrying the scents of salt, distant kelp, and the wild. The cub raised its head, catching it all. This was its inheritance, not an easy world, but a living one. Nanook's breath escaped in a cloud. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe in something not yet seen. That perhaps someday his cub would raise one of its own. As the sky began to lighten, the ice beneath their feet hummed. Not from threat, but from life. Cracks that once screamed with collapse now whispered with movement. The cub darted ahead, playful again, chasing a snowflake caught in the breeze. Nanook watched, momentarily frozen, then followed with a lumbering gait softened by peace. They moved in rhythm, old and young, past and future. The Arctic would never be what it was. But it could still be something. Their survival was not a victory over nature, but a vow to continue within it. For every melt, there would be a step forward. For every wound, a scar that sings. And in their steps, the land remembered itself. The final sound was not a roar, nor a crash, nor a cry. It was a breath. A long, quiet exhale from Nanook as he watched his cub bound forward, across the thawing ice. The air shimmered with promise. Behind them, the scars of escape stretched wide. But ahead was space untouched, undefined. Nanook stood tall, just for a moment, as the wind danced through his fur. Then, with a slow step, he followed. No music played. No words were spoken. Only movement. Only survival. And that, in a world forever melting, was the most powerful ending of all.